You can't say Dr. Mo ain't tell ya that fear magnifies.
Hey everybody, welcome to Perpetual Motion, a podcast focused on lifestyle, communication, personal empowerment, and positive relationships. I'm your host, Dr. Mo, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and speaker coach. My goal for every episode is to elevate, educate, and motivate you with useful information that adds immediate value to both your personal and professional growth. Listen, if you're new to the show or a returning visitor, let's make this official. Please hit that subscribe button now. Today's episode is going to be both moving and inspiring. Joining me is Clint Hatton, author, speaker, and personal development leadership coach. Folks, he has a powerful testimony story about overcoming loss and living boldly. It was inspired by the life of his oldest son, Gabriel, who became a pilot at 17 and passed away in a tragic crash shortly before his 18th birthday. Clint recounts that experience and the wisdom and strategies his family has used to thrive despite their greatest personal loss. You have to hear this story. Welcome, Clint.
Dr. Mo, how are you this morning?
It is well. It is well. I'm excited to just be alive and able to have an engaging conversation with an inspiring person like yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. I see you the same way. I've been trolling you quite a bit since we connected, and I just love what you're doing.
Appreciate it. Speaking of mutual admiration, I truly love your tagline, courageous humans, inspiring lives. I want to know your story first. What was life like for young Clint, and how did that influence your current outlook on life?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Southern California, part of LA County. And so that's where I spent most of my youth up until I was probably about 19 years old. And, I really feel like I had a pretty normal, mid, maybe lower middle class. We never had a ton of money, but we never really lacked for anything. So that's why I say it that way. Things were, good. I was an athlete, so always very involved in especially football and baseball. And so up until I was about 12 years old, life was pretty good. My parents had been married up to that point because they had me pretty late, almost or over 25 years at that point. And there was always some fighting in the house, very, very emotional. I don't think that they knew how to communicate very well. Of course, you're just a kid, so this is all you know, right?
Right.
But then things changed really, really quickly. My dad ended up having an affair, and that led to him moving out. And so that became a really dramatic, point in my life. I have one brother, but he's almost 8 years older. So he had actually moved away. He lived like 8 hours away. So it was just me and my mom. And she, they got married when they were 18 and 16 years old. She was 16, kind of from a different generation. And so she didn't handle that very well, and began to drink pretty heavily and began to have suicidal ideation, which I didn't know that term obviously back then. But and then it came to the point where there was at least two occasions where she attempted to take her life, and I was there with it. Almost took me out. And one time was in a vehicle driving at a high speed, and she was drunk, and I had, I'm 12, I can't drive. So we spun out on a road going about 65 miles an hour, and fortunately didn't hit anything, and survived that one. And then there was another time with a handgun that my dad had come to pick me up because her and I had gotten in a big fight because, I was 12. I just couldn't process what was going on.
Right.
And we started to walk away to the car, heard a gunshot. Oh my gosh, ran back to the house, found her in my closet, and we kind of jumped on top of her. I just started yelling and, hey, you're going to shoot me. You're going to shoot me. And she gave up the gun. And so there was, some pretty dramatic experiences that happened at that time. And the whole thing lasted about a year and a half before they reconciled. But it was a crazy time in my life. So it definitely shaped some things pretty early on, even though I didn't necessarily recognize that my mind and my emotions and my thought patterns were being shaped. So, there's of fear probably that had kicked in at that time. Rejection. I tried to just process it in such a way that my dad's just my dad. And, he had set me aside one day and said, listen, this is not about you. This is just about us. And so I'm making this decision. So I'm 12. I'm trying to process that. But I think, in reality, there was a lot of rejection there that he did leave us. And I could go on and on. There was a lot of events in that year and a half, but it did shape some things. And so ultimately what happened is coming out of that at, late 12, 13 years old, I started to abuse drugs and alcohol. So pretty early age for that, promiscuous as well. But the drugs and alcohol, it became just kind of a part of my life. And, I'm thankful looking back that I continued to be an athlete all the way through junior college. So there was always that kind of kept me from completely going over the edge and not working towards anything.
That requires some discipline.
Yes.
Yeah, teamwork and all of that. That was a salvation thing there.
Absolutely. It was kind of a guiding force for a little while there. But ultimately, my career ended at 19, had my second catastrophic knee injury, which kind of was another thing. And so, from 19 to 30 years old, I was a professional salesperson. I was just trying to make it, but I got, heavy into drug abuse, even more so than when I was younger. I actually did meth for 9 years during that season.
Really?
Which surprises a lot of people when they know me today. And even when I tell the story, honestly, it's like telling somebody else's story. It was 25 plus years ago, almost 30 years ago now. But, it was the way I dealt with life. Right.
There was a lot there. And I can appreciate growing up in a household where there's, a lot of anger, emotion that the parents separate and come back together. And it's interesting, I talk to a lot of people and I like to hear people's personal story before they talk about what they're doing and where they are now. Because, if we just jump straight to that pedestal, sometimes people don't understand that it's a journey. Yeah. And there's a lot for all of us to overcome. And no matter what you see now or what you think you see, there's a story and there's a battle and there's a struggle to get to where we are today. And everything you just shared, and we're going to talk about what you're doing now, really, really, I think it's going to resonate with a lot of people. It resonates with me. But what I'm wondering is, leaving that environment, people either go one or two ways, from their family of origin. Either they end up just like them, or they swear, I'm absolutely not going to be like that. I'm going to be nice to my wife. I'm going to be great to my kids. I'm going to, do all of these things. Was there a time, it sounds like for a while you really were kind of modeling some of the behavior that you saw, which is what we do. We're kids. Those are formative years. What was the switch to make you say, you know what, I'm not going to repeat those patterns, those tendencies of my family? What made you turn your life around?
Yeah, well, that's a fantastic question. I think it was a process and a journey even getting to the switch, because I said that from the time I was a late teenager, right? And I do want to make the point really quick for those listening, especially those that know me. My parents did reconcile. They ended up married for over 65 years. They both passed away several years ago. And we had a great relationship in the last probably 20 years of that as well. So, that was reconciled. But to your point, I did carry a lot of what I saw into relationships, even though I stated, I don't want to be like that.
Right.
And so, I think it took some hard times first. I don't think I've shared this with anybody in a very long time. I actually got engaged 3 times.
Oh, wow.
That went nowhere, all 3 for different reasons, which, was pretty embarrassing. And I'm old enough now to where it's less embarrassing, but, and so I get in this relationship and then something would implode. And, the one thing that was the most impacting in a very negative way and we'll get to the switch here in a second,
sure.
was the rejection. I could be in a relationship and be kind of happy-go-lucky and be this really good guy, because I was a friendly guy, and generally the life of the party. But in a romantic relationship, if that person cheated on me, that's when the wrong switch would flip. Mm. It's really the only thing that would make me truly go off. And so there was a period of time there in my 20s up until almost 30 where I was definitely verbally abusive. And there was a few times where, pushing, shoving, throwing stuff. Mm-hmm. And the trigger was always infidelity. And I just didn't have a way of processing that. And I didn't have the language for it at the time that was the trigger. So I really didn't even realize that was happening until years later. I just knew this is not who I want to be, Okay. Right. And so at the age of 31 years old, for me, I had an experience. I had a friend that invited me to a church. I was living in Northern California at that time. And I gave my life to God. And, I was actually in a marriage at that time that we were both just a total train wreck. Emotionally, we both abused alcohol. I had my last experience with meth just prior to this, mm-hmm. and woke up one morning. And I think I want to say this as we tell the story. I think a lot of where we want to go in life has a lot to do with the decisions you make of who you want to be, not necessarily what you want to do, right, but who you want to be. And so before I had that experience and gave my life to God, I woke up one morning. It was the last time we had done meth together. And I didn't like the way I felt. It wasn't fun anymore. I didn't like the way I physically and emotionally felt the next morning. And I just made a decision that day. I'm done. This is not who I want to be. I'm done. And so never did it again. And wow. That was, 27 years ago,
I've dealt with addictive personalities, people with addictive habits when I was in clinical practice. And then I've interviewed a lot of addiction and recovery experts. And I'm just jumping in to say that is an incredibly difficult thing to do. Opioids, meth, that whole group, they get into the brain in such a way that they just really get a hold on you. So kudos to you for being able to do that on your own. I know that was not easy.
Yeah, and that's not to say that there was still some alcohol abuse that continued, that kind of thing. But yes, to your point, I don't even think until years later when I really myself studied the effects of it and even how it was made, for that matter. And I think I think back in those days, if I'd have known how it was made, I probably would have never done it. But I didn't have that knowledge until many years later. I'm like, oh my gosh, but So I had to recognize that there was this trigger, and so the drugs was one thing. I put that aside. But after I gave my life to God, this mess of a marriage we were in, we went through Christian marriage counseling for over 8 months. I really felt like at that time that God was calling me to help other people because I'd always wanted to help people, always. From the time I remember even being 11 or 12 and, talking people through things, yeah. Even though I didn't have a whole lot of wisdom, right?
Right. It's a gift, though, that we don't recognize that we have. It's a gift. Yeah.
Oh, people would tell me all kinds of stuff, Dr. Mo. I remember one time even doing meth. I was at a party and a bunch of people left to go get more booze. One was this married couple that I just met, and everybody left but me and the wife. And there was nothing romantic going on there. We were just continuing to party and talk. And she ends up telling me about she had been raped and all this story. And she goes, I've never told anybody, not even my own husband. I remember thinking at the time, that's really strange. Why are you telling me, But that would happen over and over again over the course of my early young life. And so I always wanted to help people, but, again, didn't have the wisdom or the healthy mechanisms to really, truly help somebody. So, but it was in there. So, we went through marriage counseling and I knew I wanted to help people. She wanted to go in a different direction and she ended up divorcing me. And so that was another hit, if you will. Mm-hmm. But it was different. It was just different this time because I felt like I'd finally begun to have a path towards being the person that I wanted to be. So that began my new journey, if you will, of growing personal development. I went to a lot of different types of seminars with the company I was in to learn how to become a leader, someone with high character, integrity, and those types of things. And it set a new course for my life.
Nice. And those people think personal development books and courses and professional growth, a lot of people think those are a waste of time. But like you, I have learned some really incredible skills and strategies and been able to evaluate my own actions and emotions a lot better as a result of those. And they help in my personal life too. The things I learned about communication and anger management and leadership, people don't, but you should take those home, and you'll find that you have better relationships at home too. There's really no cutting that off, even just being kind and understanding. So I am very, very excited that I asked that question because I was not expecting that response at all. And thank you for sharing that and being so transparent, because it's going to make what we're about to talk about resonate even more with people understanding what had already occurred for you.
Yeah. And I add one quick thing to that real fast because it was over 2 years later after my divorce when I moved to Dallas that I ended up meeting my bride now. We've been married almost 20 years. Mm-hmm. And during that time, to your point, I knew that I did not know how to be a good husband. I knew that, obviously there's always two sides to a marriage that's unhealthy, but I owned my part. Mm-hmm. And so for 2 years, that's all I did. I just read everything I could read on character development, on how to be a good husband, how to be a good father, because I felt like that was coming. We never had children, my previous marriage. And so that was really paramount, I believe, to when I got into the marriage that I'm currently in. And it's been an amazing journey for over 20 years. And that was pretty foundational to some of the things that we would end up going through as a married couple, including what we're about to talk about.
Absolutely. And all you can do after those instances, well, I think the best use of your time is how can I be better, instead of dwelling on what was wrong with that other person and how they could have been better, because you can't control that. But what can I do differently? So to more current day, millions, as you know, have experienced unexpected loss very recently because of world events. And I want to talk about that process, the loss and processing grief. I mentioned in the intro that your son, Gabriel, tragically passed away in an accident at a very young age. I think I've heard it in what you've shared so far, but in that instance, what led you to give your pain a purpose?
Yes. Well, I think there's a lot of little things. That's really where I like to start. I think a lot of people want to know what's the one big thing, but it was really a lot of little things. We had some experiences of different kinds of loss and setback over the course of our marriage. And there's really nothing that truly prepares you to lose a child. So I'm not implying that at all. But we did have a history of the way in which we approached when we had some pretty big challenges. We suffered a miscarriage, so we went through that. My wife actually almost, or could have, I'll say it that way, could have died in all three of the births for different reasons. My youngest son was actually born 1 pound, 14 ounces, 3 months early.
Wow.
And it's because she had HELLP syndrome, which is the extreme version of a pregnancy disease where you're basically your blood pressure skyrockets. It was 200 plus, over 100 something. And your major organs begin to shut down. And so they have to take the baby for either one of you to have a chance. One of my sons, she wasn't coming out of the anesthesia. We've had some scary moments, Yeah. So there have been some things over the years that the values and the mindsets we've had have kind of stacked upon one another that prepare you at least a little bit for something, more significant. But, when Gabriel passed away, first of all, it was a hellish long night, if I could say it that way. We knew he disappeared off the radar about 8:30 p.m. that night. We really didn't get the official word until 3:30 in the morning when the coroner called us that he was officially dead. And, there was a whole bunch of other confusion and conflicting stories throughout the night that for sake of time, we won't get into, but it was only at that point that we knew he was absolutely, certainly gone. Mm-hmm. And so when my two younger sons, which at that time, Joel was 14, he was a freshman in high school, and Liam was 9, he was in 5th grade. I had that task of what I call the impossible conversation, right?
Right.
And so, it started our journey of a few things, really how we were going to grieve. It started with how we were going to give our pain a purpose, even though there was no full plan for that yet. Obviously, that morning, it was just, I knew in that moment, I just had this sense that, especially as the dad, that I needed to set a compass, so I turned to them both. I turned to my bride too. And I said, listen, we've been helping people because, she also, I was in pastoral ministry for 17 years and my wife was a part of that as well. So we've helped a lot of people through things like this. I've been in hospital rooms with people when their loved one is dying right in front of them, and, some pretty tough situations. And as you said, so many times marriages and families, they just don't do well. So I said, listen, we have two choices and how we're going to start processing this. The first one is we can choose for the rest of our lives to just identify and focus on the tragedy itself, how he died, how tragic that is, and all the things that we're going to miss. And if we do that, we're going to be a shell of ourselves and we're not going to be all we were created to be, and we're not going to live a full life. But there's a second choice, and that is we can choose life. And what that simply meant, Dr. Mo, is I said, Gabriel attacked life. You already said he became a pilot at a young age. Not typical. There's some out there, but it's a small number. He taught himself how to play guitar. He became an amazing photographer. Even many of our friends, we have actually multiple friends there. One's even a Sony photographer, very high end, that were like, this kid's amazing, But that's how he lived his life. Everything was like the next adventure. What's next, And he encouraged people in the same way. And so I said, we're going to choose to live like he lived, because it's the only way I felt like we could honor his life, is not by dwelling on his death, but by honoring the way he lived. And we would each, of course, have our own expression of what that looked like. So that was really critical, I believe, that first morning, because it began to set the compass. And then the second part of that, which was how I wanted to frame how we were going to grieve as a family, is I just told them, listen, we don't know how each of us is going to grieve. I don't know how I'm going to feel from day to day. I don't know, hour to hour for a while, So there's times when we're going to be angry. There's times when we're going to be very sad and cry and need to cry. There's going to be times where we're just confused and don't understand why we have to, walk through this. And then there's going to be also times where we're joyful and telling stories and, great times that we had. And so it's going to be all the above.
Yeah. I'm going to jump in there. And
yeah, absolutely.
I love what you just said. Most of us have not had a course in grief and loss and really don't quite understand just even personalities, because you gave them permission to grieve in whatever way they needed to. And so often what I've seen is there's a dominant personality in the family and they want to say, we're going to move forward. We're not going to talk about this anymore. We're just going to move on like it never happened. And that doesn't work for everybody.
No.
And it's not healthy that you tell a person who's close to you and might be the person that, wants to come to you to say, I'm feeling terrible today. I'm sad or whatever. And you're forcing them to just bury those emotions because one person has decided we're not going to discuss this anymore. And I've seen it quite a bit, and it just wreaks havoc on people. I don't know that there's a right way, but I don't think you can dictate to anyone how they process loss. So I just want to emphasize that, and I'm saying this from experience. Last year I lost my dad, I lost my uncle, I lost my cousin who's younger than me, and I lost my aunt, my mom's older sister, who was like the matriarch after my grandmother died. And I was close to each of those people, but I found myself even within that processing those losses in different ways. Either I was trying to work too much, or I was sleeping all the time, or I just couldn't focus. Yeah. And I was so grateful that I was able to talk about it with family members and not have people say, well, just move on, don't think about it. That's That's really important. And probably, I'm sure something you learn as part of your, journey in ministering to other people, but it's a message worth repeating.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I think you mentioned you've had guests on before too that can speak to the more medical side, if you will. There's tons of data that if you suppress your emotions for an extended period of time, and that's not going to be the same for everybody. Some people can get away with it for years, right? But you're going to pay a bill, and you're never fully who you could be. So actually, before I go any further, I'm glad you said that. I want to make it really clear with your listeners too, as I continue to tell you just our personal process and journey, that we're not perfect people. We're not superhuman. We didn't do anything I'm about to tell you perfectly. Mm-hmm. But what I'm going to describe is just a compass that helped us keep recalibrating, So,
yes,
I said, we don't know how we're going to grieve. So the pact that we made that morning was, I said, boys, so you need to know whatever you're feeling at any given moment on any given day is totally okay. And so if you need to cry, you can cry. If you need to be pissed off, excuse me, if I could say that, and you need to yell and scream, then that's okay. And we're going to do the same. This isn't a rule that we're giving you guys because we're the parents and you're the kids. And so you have to do it, but we don't. We're going to do this together. So if I'm feeling sad, you're going to know it. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm not going to be afraid to cry in front of you. And we're going to talk things through, And so that was what we established that morning. And again, messy as all get out. It's not easy. There were times where some of us went a day or two or maybe a week where, we suppress something. Part of that's because, as you know, your emotions, especially in traumatic situations, are so complex that sometimes, especially early after a tragedy, you kind of got to figure out, what am I feeling right now? What's the trigger? Is it the loss of my son, or life is still going on? Am I stressed out about my career? Am I stressed out about, a situation with a relationship, or am I just tired? I've been working too much, so, but it set us on the journey as a team. And I think that's so critical. All of your listeners, if this is something that, they can really relate to and they know they're still working through it, you've got to have someone in that journey with you. The most dangerous thing that we could have done, any one of the four of us, is get isolated.
Right. And if not, family members, if you're with a company that has EAP, do avail yourself of that. Your company is providing that option for you. And you can call, they'll give you 4, 5, 6 visits, but just somebody to talk to and kind of hold your hand, especially through the early part of it, can keep you from having some physical manifestations of the emotional turmoil. So
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that and what you said to your children, because I can't imagine that experience. I can't imagine, talking to the remaining siblings and how that conversation would go. So it's interesting to hear how it was handled. And then I want to, focus a little bit more on your marriage. You've been married 20 plus years. I saw several references to your wife throughout your various sites. I love that I love that you promote a happy, healthy relationship and a happily married person, particularly with all you've been through. But there's going on after a personal tragedy, and then there's growing through it. And it sounds like you guys have been able to grow through it. How do you build a healthy marriage while processing this great loss?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that was true for us is we had a very solid foundation before this happened. So, to be fair, there's a lot of situations. I mean, I was in a marriage years ago, as I already talked about earlier, I can't even fathom what kind of a train wreck could have happened, in that situation. So we had a very solid foundation. And as I implied earlier, we've been through some things. But certainly a tragedy like this puts a new test on it. So we needed to be even more intentional about communicating. we've had a habit of talking a lot, and we've done a lot of things together. We help couples, marriage crisis situations for probably the last 15 years, So we've seen a lot, we've experienced a lot. And so we've been able to grow through some other people's pain points, right, as well, and learn some good habits. But this definitely set a new challenge for us. So, we sat down, and this was over the course of, weeks and months, Dr. Mo. This wasn't like a one-time thing and then, hey, we're good now, But we sat down frequently and just, first of all, are you okay today? Okay, meaning not are you over it, because we will never be over it. Our lives were changed forever.
Yes.
And we are still processing it, and we'll be processing it the rest of our lives. Every milestone, there's a measure of processing it because he's not here.
Right.
And, so that's important to recognize. Is where, for me, I'm not looking to remove the pain, for example. A lot of people talk about, well, you're still grieving, and you need to get to a point where you just don't feel the pain anymore. It's like, what are you talking about? I feel the pain because of the love that we share, because of the relationships that I had, with my son. So we gave each other permission for that, which I think was really good. And so we had some conversations where I'd ask, how are you doing? I'm good today. And then other ones where she would break down, or vice versa. She would ask me too. One of the things that we felt like was really important is we could not assume, just because over the course of one given day or a week or whatever, and we seemed fine, that we were fine. Mm-hmm. So we would periodically, and still do, ask each other questions and just have that. Now, again, we had the foundation of what I call having courageous conversations,
yes,
where we're willing to give the truth, right? But that was critical because, there were times when I needed to cry and I was processing something. There was any kind of a trigger that would set me off, which, doesn't take much when it's someone that close to you, right?
Yeah.
And she wouldn't try to stop me, she wouldn't go, okay, it's okay. Don't cry. And I wouldn't do that with her. We'd allow, or if we were angry, whatever the emotion was,
mm-hmm,
we allow each other to feel through it. And then I believe everything in life, when it comes to our emotions, just the way we were created is our emotions are constantly exchanging. We're exchanging emotions subconsciously. We don't even know. And then there's other times where we're doing it consciously. And so, we allow each other to feel through that. And then we can move into a new emotion, which maybe is we start talking about being grateful and some of the fun experiences that we had. Now it turns to joy, But we practice that on a very regular basis. And that's one thing I think that's really been helpful. But another is that even though, again, we had what we felt like was pretty good communication for almost 17 years at that point, we challenged each other. We began to dissect everything in our life. I think when someone in your family, and in my case, I can speak to my son being the most painful, but I've lost my parents in the last several years during COVID, just like the rest of the world. There were other people that were close to us that also died, and not necessarily due to COVID, but just during that time period.
Yeah.
And
tough time.
Yeah. So it was really important for us to be honest about what we wanted in life. How do we really want to spend our time? What are the relationships in our life that are bringing, joy, bringing a growth, that are pushing us to get better as a human being and to be willing to take risks and not allow fear to cripple us from chasing the things that we really wanted to do. So we had a lot of those conversations, and they weren't all smooth. Sometimes we ended up, we would,
that's real.
Exactly. We would have conversations about things we thought, 17 years, we've talked about everything there is to talk about, right? And you would realize there was maybe some things inside of her that she had dreamed about that I missed along the way, because I wasn't paying close enough attention, or she hadn't fully expressed, and vice versa. So that sometimes was hard, For me, I felt like some of the stuff she brought up, am I now a failure? Have I not been as great a husband as maybe I thought I was? So we were very real with each other and had some arguments, but those arguments helped us process and helped us get to a point where we were in agreement. And that helped us continue to move through grief. It helped us continue to move through trying to take our entire family, including our boys, and let's move into this new season and be really intentional about who we want to be and what we want to do.
Okay. Well, you've led your family and you're leading your family through that journey in a remarkable way. And let's talk about how you're a coach, you have your ministry. How do you help others find or revive their passion and live out their dreams?
Well, I made a pretty big shift. As I said a little bit ago, I was in pastoral ministry for 17 years. So I've been coaching and mentoring and mentoring teams and leadership. I've been involved in some pretty large organizations. So, I've had a lot of great experiences and a lot of great mentoring along the way. But it had always been in that space. So during this time and even processing the way Gabriel lived his life and the way he just was always the next thing, I had wanted to move into this personal development space and coach people outside of the church, if you will, for many years, but I didn't have the courage to make that decision. Mm-hmm. I even at one point, and I say this in my book, I called myself a coward. I realized when I processed the way Gabriel lived his life that I had not a coward in everything, but I had little compartments of my life that I was a coward. I let fear cripple me and have all these excuses of why I didn't do the things that were really in my heart to do. And personal development coaching was one of them. So I did. I launched out into that. So even though it's not anything new in the sense of I've been speaking on it and, working with people for many years, I'm jumping into kind of a new realm, and including starting the business side of it, which I've never been an entrepreneur, until I started this. So with that, my dream and where I can help people, and my tagline is courageous humans, inspiring lives, is I believe every human being, I truly do. I believe every human being has these 3 C's that I'm going to say right now. One is I believe that we were all created to be courageous. I believe courage is in us. I don't think it's this external thing that you have to look under every rock and try to read books, although those things may be helpful. There's courage in you. You just need to learn how to access it. I believe that all of us were created to be creative. I believe there's a creative genius in every human being. And so I love to help people unlock that, because there's a lot of people that are just stuck. They're stuck in careers that they hate, jobs that they hate, and they feel like they've been doing this so long, so it's comfortable, which is not one of the C's, but they're comfortable, but yet they're living a half life. They don't even love what they do. And there's a creative genius in them that if they would unlock it, it could change their life forever. And it may not involve a career change. It could be they do something outside of that along with that. But I believe that creative genius is in everybody. And the third one is compassion. I believe every single person has within them the ability to be really compassionate. And we see that, right? We see that when tragedies hit. We see that when floods hit. Right. People just jump in, and people that maybe were even enemies before suddenly are instantly friends helping one another. So those are the types of things that I love to help people unlock. Because to me, when you talk about personal development coaching and you talk about personal growth, what a lot of people don't understand unless they're really in that is that I don't sit down with someone or a group of people to tell them what to do. What I do is ask a lot of great questions or give them different insights that make them think and make them realize that there's something great already inside of them. And then they make the decisions, those courageous decisions to change their life. And once they've done that, game on. And that just brings me a ton of joy, a ton of energy. And it's how I want to spend the rest of my life. And obviously for me, people that are really stuck with great personal loss is another area that I'm now an unwanted expert, if you will say. It's not a club I wanted to join, but I want to be able to help people that have suffered.
I understand having your mission changed a bit. I love the 3 C's, but I think I've shared with you that I'm a cancer survivor. Actually, I take daily oral chemotherapy, and that was just such an abrupt change in my life as well. And because of the way I'm just pressed on and dealt with it and become an advocate, people are often asking me for advice or to speak on the topic. And that is the last thing in the world. I mean, I've been doing, motivational speaking for 30 years, but that is the last thing in the world that I ever thought I would be constantly asked to speak about and counsel people about. And I resisted it for a long time. I don't know if you resisted talking to people about your loss, but I
Yes.
resisted that because I was like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to share it. I let my life be my testimony. But people do need to hear from you. They do need to hear specifically from you about that journey. And now I embrace it and accept it. But I get what you're saying there. And I love that all of the lessons learned that you're pouring them into others and putting them in your book, Big, Bold, Brave, How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. You've shared some from that, but I'm just interested in how you came up with the title and share with the listeners why they should pick up a copy today. I think they should, but I want to hear from you.
I do too. I absolutely do. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you framed it that way because you just said something really critical. I did experience exactly that. For a couple of years after the accident, I knew that I would be writing a book someday, but I didn't want to. And I don't know if your reason was the same, but mine, if I'm being honest, it was really rooted mostly in I did not want this tragedy to be my identity to people.
Yes.
That's really it at the end of the day. And over the course of time and working through the grieving process, using some of the things that I've talked about earlier, I really began to realize that, okay, this is not my identity, but this is a part of my story for the rest of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And if I could use this term, if I could leverage that, if I could give my pain a purpose in that way, to where if this is a part of how I'm going to help people, then I need to be okay with that, And so I finally got to that point, which ultimately led to Big, Bold, Brave, the book, and the personal development company. I'm glad you asked how it came about because, when Gabriel passed, he was very young, as you stated, he was 17 years old. So it made the news immediately. Mm-hmm. And actually the morning after the accident, I had NBC here in Dallas contact me and they wanted to do an interview that day.
Oh my.
And of course, we're a wreck. And so the reporter was very kind. I'm going to say that right now. She was very kind the way she approached me. But she was approaching me. And so I said, there's no way. We can't do an interview. But at the end, she said something, at the end of the call, she said something really important. And that was, she said, listen, I can't imagine how hard it would be to do it, but there's going to be a story that airs. And if we don't have your involvement, it's basically just going to be a report on his death, which you're going to hear a theme here of what I already said, what we talked about on the couch that morning before she called me. Mm-hmm. She says, but if you'll allow me, I can come to your home. And it turned out, obviously I've said I was a Christian. She was a believer. And she said, I'm going to let you tell the story the way you want to tell it. You can include your faith. You can include what you want to say about Gabriel. And that's how we'll frame it.
And so it's about his life and not just about.
Exactly. And so I did not say yes, Dr. Mo. I said, okay, let me think about it. Hung up the phone. One of my father-in-laws was here. And when I talked to him, he said, and this was the person that I thought would be the least likely to say, you guys should do this for a variety of reasons. And he said, I think you should do it for that reason. If you're going to focus on his life, then tell the story of his life. Don't let them report just on a death. Mm. So we made that decision. So in the interview, what ended up happening is I don't even remember saying the phrase, he lived big, bold, and brave. Mm-hmm. The whole interview, honestly, until I go back and I watch it, it's, a big blur, right? But we watched it later that night, the actual segment, and she did a beautiful job. Her name is Katie Blakely. So shout out to Katie. And at the end of it, instead of playing the part where I said it, she closed it out with saying, Gabriel's parents want to encourage you to live like Gabriel, big, bold, and brave. I get emotional saying that almost every single time.
I'm getting emotional hearing it. Wow.
And, there was something about it. It was life. It had life on it. Now, it would be months before that became anything other than a family mantra. It wasn't, oh, I'm going to start a personal development company. I'm going to write a book. That was months and months later. But that's where that phrase came from. So then when it came time for me to start the personal development company, to me, the name, I Googled to make sure nobody had it. I'm like, yes, Big, Bold, Brave was obvious. And then when it came time to write the book, I knew this is the title. This is a no-brainer.
Right.
And so I wrote the book, Dr. Mo. I want to make this clear too, because we've talked about this a little bit. It wasn't just, it's not a grief book, although it does describe our grieving process through parts of it. I wrote the book because 3 months after my son passed away, COVID hit. And the last couple of years, there's been such enormous loss in so many different ways, not just losing, a loved one, although that's obviously the most difficult to process. But people have lost all kinds of things. They've lost careers. They've lost their business. The marriages have imploded under the pressure of it, and all those things. And so I knew I wanted to write something that was, if I could say it this way, almost like a life manual of how you can walk through anything, any circumstance. But if you live by a certain set of values, if you subscribe to maintaining a healthy mindset and growing daily, you can get through anything. And you can become a courageous human that inspires lives.
Wow. And on that note, I feel people just right now rushing over to Amazon Books to get Big, Bold, Brave, How to Live Courageously in a Risky World. Before we go, how can our listeners contact you to learn more about speaking, coaching, and your pending project?
Yeah, the best place to go is the website. That's bigboldbrave.us, although I like to say bigboldbrave.us, because I believe everything great on this planet happens through collaboration. So it takes us to change this world.
Yes, it
so
does.
If they go there, though, Dr. Mo, they can buy the book if they want to buy the book directly through me. I'm offering a discount right now before the pre-launch or before the launch on February 1st. They can see all my different social media platforms, coaching, all that stuff, kind of one-stop shopping. But also for those listeners that are maybe international, it's going to be easier for them for sure to go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, one of those, everywhere books are sold. They can go and do that as well. But I would love for people to sign up on my website to subscribe, because I've got a newsletter I'm going to start producing once a month where I want to let people know the next things that are coming. And I'm going to be sharing other people's lives stories too that live big, bold, and brave. So if you want to connect with me in a meaningful way, go there, sign up, and then buy the book however you would like to buy the book.
Beautiful. Congratulations on your book. Thank you for your time. I love the merch too. You guys can't see him, but he's got a really nice sweatshirt. I need to get one of those. It's got Big, Bold, Brave in script, white sweatshirt with this beautiful, beautiful tagline and title of his book. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Please take a moment to subscribe to this podcast and visit my website at drmoanderson.com for more powerful tips on big, bold, brave living. And wasn't that a great program? Oh, love that episode. I enjoyed it. I hope you did too. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share. Learn more about me on my website, drmoanderson.com. That's MOE. You can read book excerpts, watch videos, learn about my services that I offer, and book me for a speaking engagement. I'd love to talk with your group, and I'd love to work with you. So until the next time, review, renew, and renew. Thank you.